Hi, I'm Kavita. As the title states, I am high functioning autistic and wish to share my experiences for the sake of providing perspective and education from my personal struggle. I put together this essay in hopes that it could reach someone who's also struggling or has struggled with similar things, and my perspective is able to help them within their life in some way or another. And if for years, I've struggled with and been challenged by the social developmental shortcomings that are associated with people diagnosed on the autism spectrum. Since my diagnosis at the age of 11, I have made efforts to better understand and find methods in not only better understanding the world around me, but also better understanding myself. After over a decade of personal growth and overcoming adversity, I feel that my life experiences are something worth sharing with those who may be struggling to find their own way and find their own worth. I want to make this very clear right off the bat, though. I am not a behavioral health professional. I do not hold any degrees in medical fields. I have not even taken a psychology class. I am just someone speaking on their own personal experience in the hopes that my story can inspire and help others who have been in my shoes, who are in my shoes. Because above all else, like I said earlier, if I can help someone avoid the hurdles and struggles that I've had to fumble my way through, then maybe it's all been worth it. Because I just like to help people and I like to share where I've been. I don't remember much about my early childhood other than I struggled to make and maintain friendships and was generally confused when it came to school, recreational activities, just life in general. Um, Even as simple as it should have been for me back then, I still found everything very confusing. I did well with grades and stuff in school, but struggled in other aspects, and I just generally felt different. I had a hard time completing in class assignments on time. I had outbursts when it came to managing my emotions, and just generally felt like, and looking back in retrospect, I was kind of in a world of my own. I remember going to tons of psychiatrists and behavioral health specialists because my mother knew something was different about her son. Didn't know what, but knew something was off. I remember at one point I saw, I think it was a neurologist who did a test where they taped electrodes to my head in another one of those attempts to figure out what was wrong with me. And there were no answers other than he's not normal. And by fifth grade, even I was well aware that I was not like other kids. I would easily describe fifth grade as one of the lowest points in my life, and certainly one of the most turbulent. My parents got divorced beginning fifth grade, and a world I struggled to understand got even more complicated and more difficult to cope with, let alone in a healthy manner. Unfortunately, it's not an exaggeration to say that I had no friends in school at the time, and a good amount of the student body bullied and harassed me for being incredibly quirky, gullible, naive, and quick to anger. I remember clearly an instance when I walked into a classroom to pick up something, and this one kid who always used to give me a hard time started throwing verbal jabs at me to the whole class's amusement. I was literally laughed out of the classroom. And they did this all in front of the teacher, who made kind of an effort, I guess, to get them to stop, but it didn't do anything. I left humiliated. And obviously, I still remember it to this day. Um, the school itself did very little to try and combat the bullying and harassment that I faced every day, either just being either providing or out of touch advice, or just not acknowledging the problem altogether. And I remember that being a critique my mother had for years of the school, that they just didn't really do anything to help me. I remember there was a guidance counselor at the time who I saw from third grade up to fifth grade, who she told me to use these exact words when it came to confronting bullies. I do not like it when you, I would like you to stop. That was her genuine advice that she believed would help me deal with this bullying problem I was having. I was 8, maybe 9 at the time, and I remember telling her bluntly, I'm gonna get beat up if I try to do that. I'm not, I gotta clarify, obviously, I'm not saying this to drum up a pity party or try to solicit sympathy from random internet users. I want to paint as vivid a picture as possible of the perspective and life I grew up with. And it just so happens that I had a rough childhood. It is what it is. The one silver lining that came from all of this was the psychiatrist I was seeing at the time had a potential answer to what was different about me. And I didn't know this until afterwards, but she referred my mother, my dad, I guess, to a specialist up where my family lived up north. And so at the end of the school year, I went on a trip to visit the family, but unbeknownst to me, I would also be getting seen by another specialist. And once again, I remember very little. Couldn't even tell you what she looked like. All I remember was that the examinations and tests lasted for about a week. I was spending 8 hours a day during my summer vacation in this cold psychology office. And my mother and grandparents had to bribe me with Legos to get me to finish with these tests. So by the end, we had an answer. I had Asperger's. And it was explained to me by my mother, who was also not a behavioral health specialist, that it was a form of autism that affected my social skills. Not far off, but doesn't really paint the full picture. And the part that stuck with me the most, though, was that I was autistic. All I knew of autism was the table of kids from the ESE class that I would sit next to or in front of during school lunches in elementary school. They were typically either nonverbal or would occasionally have outbursts and meltdowns that would have them taken or dragged, kicking and screaming out of the cafeteria. And I was just, I don't know, I had an interest in it and found it strange, obviously, as a kid who just didn't know any better. And this was my black and white mental depiction of autism in my head at that age. And I remember thinking at the time, before I was diagnosed, that I may be different, but at least I wasn't like them. Obviously, not the most healthy way to look at the situation, and definitely a disservice to them. Obviously, at the time, I was completely aware that autism was a spectrum of individuals who could be at one polar end of said spectrum or the opposite, and plenty of people in the middle who you may never suspect of struggling with a developmental disorder. I don't know if my mother ever read any books on autism or any books on parenting an autistic child, and I know for sure that my dad didn't. He was and is very old school and adopted a sort of blunt, tough love approach to educating me on these things. And to put it lightly, it didn't work very well, and our relationship at the time really wasn't great. What further drove me to resent who I was and what I was dealing with at the time were the programs that I was put in at that age and how they handled me at that age. The same year that I had my week-long evaluation, I was entered into a summer camp for grade school autistic kids themed around island survival, because South Florida or something. I had to attend Camp Survivor from 5th grade all the way up until I was a freshman in high school every summer. Every summer I lost weeks to this camp, and from my point of view, it felt incredibly degrading, considering where I believed I stood in comparison with my development to the other attendees. Among activities, games, and sing-alongs, we were taught basic social skills, reading body language, eye contact. Even then, I probably thought I was above these basic lessons. In retrospect, I probably needed them to a degree, but I was so frustrated with the environment that I was in that I sort of just shut out everything, like nothing about it was necessary. And this was the problem I ran into for years. I was and am considered high-functioning on the autism spectrum. Well off enough to be in traditional schools and classes, not really needing special accommodations, but not developmentally able enough to be able to keep my emotions in check, understand when certain topics were appropriate, knowing where general social boundaries such as personal space and time lay, and other nuances that left me struggling socially. The other issue was that despite autism normally causing delays in behavioral and developmental maturity, I was very mature for my age. I matured very quickly at a young age, at least compared to my peers. This was a major reason why it was so frustrating to be in these environments where we were being treated our age or significantly younger in some cases, almost being talked down to, at least from how I viewed it. I think that it was because of this that I was so resistant to learning, at least with the methods that educators were attempting to guide me with. No one ever seemed to recognize this issue, and no one really addressed me as someone capable of comprehending these issues and topics. And so it was an uphill battle for years, and it wasn't something that I realized could have been the problem until much later on. In middle school, I was placed in an ESE class for one class period out of the 8 class periods in the day. For those not familiar with Florida public education, and I should have clarified this earlier, ESE stands for Exceptional Student Education. I was in gifted programs, ESE programs, and I had an individualized education plan, or IEP. The ESE classes were similar to the Camp Survivor summer camp, as far as I was able to put together. But since it was during the school year, it was obviously geared more towards education rather than being a daycare. Again, lessons on body language, eye contact, other basic social skills, and again, I wrote off these classes as too basic and unnecessary for me. We did play Bakugan on Fridays, though, so that was pretty rad. Apparently, the teacher from my ESE class also thought similar, that these classes were a little too basic for me, because before the end of 7th grade, she decided that I didn't really need to be in a social skills class. At least the one that the school and the school district had to offer. So I did make a conscious decision to take it upon myself to continue learning through trial and error, just interacting with my peers, but this was middle school. Not the most stable time in an adolescent's life to be trying to figure out how to make friends, at least in my case. So puberty and poor social skills, in my opinion, aren't exactly a winning combo when it comes to trying to make friends and enter relationships. But I'll probably dive more into that another time. One thing had changed, though. I now had Facebook, texting, and other instant messaging available to me for the first time, which meant the ability to reach people from school outside of the classroom. The problem was, it's obviously difficult to read inflection, let alone through typed messages, or for someone who misses or ignores inflection in face-to-face interaction. I also didn't understand the norms for conversations online, where to draw the line. There were a lot of instances of me messaging a whole bunch of people every day. I would get home from school, go on Facebook, and everyone who was online, I'd just be, hey, 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 how's it going? Hey, 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 what's going on? Usually they didn't answer, but I would do this almost every day. Really, and when I did get conversations, people answering me, I'd be really forcing these conversations that just weren't going anywhere. It was almost like an interrogation. Other instances, I'd be stepping over personal boundaries, well over personal boundaries. And as much as I hate to admit it, but it is an important element of the story, I was told on more than one occasion by someone I knew, or a friend at the time, to stop messaging them. Otherwise, they would get someone involved. Someone else, an adult, law enforcement, frankly, just for harassment. Almost every time, I never saw it coming. And I never understood why this was happening. And it was a total gut punch every single time. I mean, it's pretty obvious in hindsight, knowing what I know now, but it was a very low time in my life, especially when these things happened. And once again, I had popular kids taking advantage of my innocence and just not knowing better, my oblivious nature, my general desire to seek the interest and attraction of certain girls at the school as well. They would call me in the middle of the night to hear my reactions when my parents were asleep, and I'd be whispering, trying to answer back, and they'd be laughing about it. They'd try to involve me in certain age inappropriate conversations that I really wanted to have deep down, but I knew better and knew that I shouldn't be having those conversations. And on more than one occasion, they would pretend to ask me out on Facebook. In one instance, I remember I went to the girl's profile and saw, clear as day, a friend of theirs had dared her to ask me out. Despite seeing the evidence smacking me in the face, I still wanted desperately to believe that she was still genuinely asking me. It was the kind of obvious teasing and harassment that I knew in my gut was a cruel joke, but I somehow thought I could ignore and just will these things into existence. But I made it out the other side in one piece, and I started to take accountability for my lack of effort in school at the time and tried to steer myself towards a more regimented future. The summer before and the beginning of high school was a major turning point. Just before leaving middle school, I made the decision that I would enter the military after I graduated high school. I don't know what made me specifically want to. I remember I was in class and we were talking about future careers in 8th grade, and someone said, "Is anyone thinking of joining the military afterwards?" And I had never thought about it, but I was the only one in the class to raise my hand, and from there I kind of was committed to it. I enrolled in JROTC and geared myself towards moving in that direction after I graduated. One thing did happen before high school, though, that changed my entire perspective on my diagnosis. I had been through a few more psychiatrists through middle school, and none of them stuck. I ran out of one doctor's office and flat out refused to talk with him. I ran to my mother. I was like, "I'm not participating in this. I'm not entertaining this idea that I'm going to talk to another psychiatrist who's not going to help me." I still didn't see why I needed therapy or psychiatric help, and maybe I just didn't have the right doctor or therapist, especially since neither really seemed to be helping me at the time. However, the summer in between 8th and 9th grade, I met a psychiatrist who really broke down my condition for me and helped me see that an autism diagnosis isn't entirely negative. It's not all negatives, and affected me beyond just struggling with social skills. For one thing, my memory and ability to recall specific, certain vivid events from my earlier childhood was considered above par. But it was also explained on the flip side of that token that the speed in which I processed information wasn't as quick as my peers. This was something I never really realized until recently, how much this affected me through grade school. I could never finish assignments on time from kindergarten all the way through college. As I mentioned before, I matured much quicker than a lot of kids my age, which explained my preference to interact with older kids and adults over people my age or younger. And for the first time that I could recall, I had someone educated on the topic, breaking everything down for me, and speaking to me as if I was able to understand. It made all the difference this time around, and it actually hit home and sunk in. Having a further understanding of what I was dealing with mentally and having it explained directly to me was a big step in me accepting my diagnosis and being comfortable with it being a part of me and sharing that with other people. I used to flat out avoid telling people that I was autistic. But my first day of high school, I stood in front of my JROTC class during introductions and told everyone, one of my weaknesses is I am autistic in the sense that I would need help in recognizing and addressing social shortcomings. Be blunt and honest with me on where I am lacking and where I need to improve. And this proactive attitude, I think, left an impression on some of the cadets in my class, as well as the instructors. I would share my story with others at almost any chance that I had, um, including doing anti bullying events, doing interviews talking about my experience with autism and bullying, and other instances of public speaking for JROTC, specifically for events, open houses, orientations, and other projects. While there wasn't much progress with making friends and lasting connections in high school, that foundation helped me grow more as a person and better set me up for success later on. It was a step in me accepting me just a little bit more. So it's interesting that college was another blur of experience, perspective shifts, and growth beyond an educational level that, despite it being fairly recent, I don't remember much of. I came from a town of limited diversity and variety of life experiences. A limited variety of life experiences. Between the two universities I attended during my college career, my experiences meeting a wide variety of people and hearing their stories only better served for me to be a better friend and to better understand how to help people in a more effective manner. I learned through my own experiences how to better listen to people and how to try to help people in an empathetic manner rather than just being there and saying I'm sorry and how can I help and a bunch of other more generic and indirect ways of actually being there for someone. I learned that and I understood that relationships were not a meritocracy, and just being the nice guy didn't mean that I would win favor on that virtue alone. I needed to build something for myself that could be shared, not just depending on someone else for my happiness and steering my life journey. It's kind of remarkable how little I remember at this time, like I said, especially considering how recent it was. I only graduated about a year ago. But it put me leaps and bounds ahead of where I was before that. I may not be using my degree in my career field right now, but I don't regret my time in college or the experiences that I went through. One of the comments I get most frequently from people when I tell them that I'm autistic is that they can't tell. Back when I was in high school, I took this as a compliment attesting to my progress. I had a therapist who told me that maybe I could outgrow it one day, which was huge news considering my pre-diagnosis years and the awkward stumble I had through my early teens. But recently I've come to see it more as a problem because I haven't outgrown it, because I'm still autistic. I probably always will be. I definitely always will be. And I still struggle socially despite everything I've been through. There are still instances where I miss cues, overstep boundaries, and fumble in ways that make people uncomfortable, regardless of my intentions. My intentions do not matter if I'm making someone uncomfortable. Their opinion and their feelings on that matter, regardless of my condition or regardless of my intentions of what I say or do. And I try to reinforce that I am still autistic because it is still and always will be a factor in my behavior and thought process. It is not an excuse, though. It is not an excuse for my behavior. I do not see it or use it as a get-out-of-jail-free card if I mess up. I know from past experiences people who have tried to use their autism as a way to avoid consequences for poor and even borderline predatory behavior. And that lack of accountability and that hesitation to land accountability on those individuals harms the perceptions people have about how autistic people can interact with the world around them. I am a firm believer in the idea that if I'm going to live independently and be a part of society, I need to be held accountable like everyone else. There are still consequences for behavior regardless, but also understanding why we make these decisions can help to make something a learning experience instead of it just being a debilitating experience. I'll give a quick example because I don't think I explained that quite well on its own, but this should help to kind of clarify. There was a classmate I knew my last semester of college. I had actually met her the semester before. Her and I had a class or two together previous to my last semester, and we had at least one class for that graduating semester. In trying to discuss class-related topics and trying to hang out and be friends outside of class, I reached out on several different apps as well as through text. Now, I found that in some cases there are people who are active on multiple social media apps. They may have multiple accounts, but they may only really prefer to communicate on one or two different apps. So I'll usually try to see which one is the best option, which one will get the most consistent response if they are willing to talk. So, first day of class, final semester. She pulls me aside after class and tells me that she doesn't want me messaging her or reaching out to her online. She found or told me that trying to message her on multiple apps made her feel uncomfortable. I didn't argue. I didn't try to plead my case or my thought process because I could tell she didn't care. She didn't want to hear it. It didn't matter. She just wanted to make her position clear. Even though it stung like hell, I listened, I acknowledged it, and I understood those well-established boundaries. Again, doesn't matter my intentions. Intentions do not matter. She was uncomfortable, didn't want to talk, and all I could do was respect that. The only healthy thing I could do was respect that. A few weeks passed. We had to collaborate on a few projects. She said hello or cracked a few jokes to me now and then, which obviously for me I thought were mixed signals. But I only engaged if she engaged me first. It's obviously a hard line to navigate, and I found it strange, but I figured better safe than sorry, just play it safe. But one day I decided to finally ask why she still wanted to talk in class, even though we'd had the discussion just a few weeks prior that she did not want to communicate with me and she didn't want me reaching out and talking to her. She had her reasons. I'm not going to go into them. Some other stuff as well. But seeing that as sort of an opening for communication and some discussion on that topic specifically, I chose to explain my reasoning and that I was autistic and that sometimes I can miss those things and I don't see them as being, reaching out on multiple apps as being strange, especially from other positions that I've been in previously. I didn't see that as something that was unusual. And it turns out that she didn't know, despite the fact that it's not a kept secret with me that I have autism. But she didn't know, and she even made a comment about how it seemed like I had been in that position to kind of back off before, and she kind of recognized that I had been in that position. And it was true. Unfortunately, it's happened a few times in the past, but there was some level of respect between us afterwards as a result of that conversation. And I haven't kept up communication with her. Leaving college didn't really seem like we wanted to, and that's fine. But that was sort of an example that I want to give as far as knowing where to draw that line, knowing when to sort of just shut up and take that accountability, and also having those healthy conversations to try and, when the opportunity arises, to sort of make that distinction and sort of be on the same page with that. Now, despite all this, like I said, I limited my communication with her outside of class. Occasional texts about stuff we had going on for projects, but really nothing beyond that. The boundaries didn't really change, and I was still accountable for respecting them. It was still my responsibility to understand where those positions stood. And it's a hard line to walk, and mistakes are going to happen. There is no clear distinction between the factors that autism have on us in our day-to-day interactions and when we need to be held accountable for other mistakes. everyone has different opinions on it. Everyone has different boundaries. Everyone has factors of their own that play into these positions that they take in not wanting to have certain discussions or wanting to have certain space. From the foundations of their childhood, life experiences, personal trauma, and a million others I could probably name for hours. The best that we can do, in my opinion, is to understand these and let them help guide us so that we can continue to grow, all of us as a whole. And to those of you who have taken the time and patience to help guide people like me along this journey, or even just listening to this, you are appreciated more than you know. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you maybe learned something, or at least had something to take away from my story. I am thinking about putting out some more stuff on this. If you have topics that you would like me to cover, again, from my perspective on what I've dealt with, as far as I have a few that I would like to cover at some point, such as a little bit going further into relationships and developmental stuff. Sort of dealing with parents, whether or not they support you or not, certain conversation topics, and also really being your own advocate in school and in the workforce, and really trying to thread that line between, again, certain shortcomings and generally just having to be accountable and kind of step up to the plate. So if there is anything you want me to touch on, please let me know. Your feedback has the opportunity for me to try and find new ways to put the message out there, put these stories out there, and maybe even help someone. So thank you again.